back-to-back events, so many tasks on your to-do list that, it's hard to get them all done in a day. 24 hours is not enough. My life has slowed down a little bit since I'm semi-retired, but I know that's always been my thing when I was administrator. Before I left work one day, I made out my to-do list for the next day. I carried a little notebook with my pocket all the time. Kind of got to be my little thing. People kind of make fun of me, but that's how I had kept up with it. And I checked things off as I got them done during the day. And a lot of times I was adding faster than I was taking off. So that to-do list didn't always get to done. So, that's how all of us are. That wasn't just me. That's anywhere. But, we have so many things that we feel just must be done. There's just not enough time. We need more time. There's no time to get it all done. Underline all. So that's the thing. We don't have to do it all. All right? So what do we do then? Well, life is about setting priorities. What's most important? A lot of those things that are on that list are not that important anyway. And if we're that busy, then maybe we would need to step back and reassess kind of how we're living. And that's not to say that we won't still have a lot to do, but, in order for us to be happy, be fulfilled, we got to decide what matters most, maintain our focus on that, and then dedicate ourselves to living a life based on those priorities. And that's true in everything, but especially as Christians. This week's lesson carries over. There's a lot of bleed over from last week. We talked about a lot of things last week. We talked about our song "Cats in the Cradle," where the chaffing we talked about, and I don't know if you know the history of that song, but it was based on a poem that his wife wrote and gave to him. And, of course, he was guilty of those things, being a traveling musician. So he was guilty of not being around, being on the road all the time, missing things in his kids' lives and his family's life. So she wrote that, and then he finally made a song out of it and made a lot of money off of it. So he was able to slow down a little bit after he did that. But, that same sentiment in that song is the same sentiment that a lot of us have. We also mentioned last week about a lot of people spend their whole life climbing the ladder of success, only to find when they get to the top that it was leaning against the wrong wall. If you've ever done any carpenter work or anything where you put up a ladder and maybe you climbed and then you get up there and it's like, this is not even where I was supposed to be. Right now I got to move it over there. Well, if you spend your whole life climbing that ladder, there's no time to move the ladder. You're done, okay? So we got to decide which wall to lean on. So that's what we're going to talk about tonight. We're going to make 3 points like we've been making, and we'll kind of discuss some things that relate to that as we go along. The first one is decide what matters most. Set your priorities. Little statement. Desire dictates our priorities. Priority shapes our choices. Choices determines our actions. So in other words, our actions express our priorities. If you'll know what somebody's priority is, see where they spend all their time, okay? Because what's the one thing we spend we can't get back? That's time. So wherever we're spending the majority of our time, that's where our priorities are. As Christians, what should our priorities be? That's the question we really ask in tonight's lesson. Is it up to each of us as an individual to determine what's our priority, or does the Bible tell us that? Now, I challenge you to give me a book, chapter, and verse that lists those. There's not. But there are principles that if you study the Bible that tells us what those are, and it's pretty plain. Okay? And so that's what we want to look at tonight is what does the Bible lay out for us as far as priorities, and what does it say for us as priorities to live as Christians? First one, obviously, is God. That's easy, okay? God has to come first. Many people get consumed with their job. They get consumed with earning money to provide for all their needs, in parentheses, all of our needs. But it warns us about that, about being so busy that all of our life is about earning a living. Okay, are we earning a living, or are we making a life? That's what we have to think about sometimes. Sometimes our jobs are we're so locked into them that we can't see the forest for the trees, okay? It goes through what we talked about last week, where I get up, I eat breakfast, I go to work, I come home, I eat supper, I go to bed, I get up and I do the same thing over and over and over until I fall into that rut, and I kind of forget why I'm doing some of the things I'm doing anyway. So sometimes we may need to step back. Most of us in this class at our age, we've made those decisions and we're done. But there are younger folks who may be listening to this, and we may share it with them. And if they do, this may be speaking a little bit more to them as they're setting their priorities early in life. As a young man, and I've told y'all this in this class before, but I was extremely busy. I was a football coach and I was a teacher. And I also coached basketball, and I was a strength coach, and I was a track coach in the spring, and it just rolled from one end to another. I never had an off season. I was always doing something. And my family's time was not what it should have been, okay? But I was wrapped up into that. And one thing that I heard later is that if somebody asks you what you do and you say that's not what I do, that's what I am. I made that statement. I said, coaching is not what I do, that's who I am. So I knew I had a problem. So I changed, made some changes in that. And then when I got into administration, that was even busier, but it was in a different kind of busy, but I was at home a little bit more with different things. But, if we can do things so that we can put those two things together with work and family, then sometimes we can make that work. But sometimes we just maybe need to look at doing something different, okay? So when it comes to God, it boils down to, when we talk about supplying our needs, a lot of times those are really our wants. I don't have to have those things, but I feel like I have to have them. That those needs are really wants. But God has promised us He's going to take care of us. So basically it comes down to this. Either we trust God and His promises, or we put our trust in those temporal or those temporary things, those earthly things. And basically what He's asking us, He says, do you trust me enough to come through for you? And He said, if you put me first, I'll provide all those things that you need in your life. So the question is, do we have faith in God or goods? Which of the two? Where is our faith? All right. We read in history about the stock market crash in 1929. The Roaring Twenties was a time of great prosperity. World War I was over with. The doughboys were home. Things were booming. People were living, gold and silver and everything was gilded, and it was, the standard of living was high for a lot of people. Well, then when the stock market crashed, those people that had their faith in those things, they had the rug pulled out from under them. And a lot of people committed suicide. And I've done some reading on that, and we hear a lot that there was, executives jumping out of skyscraper windows to their death when they lost everything in the stock market. I read where that's maybe not necessarily that true. It did happen, but not maybe to the extent they said. But there are a lot of instances where we read of people who lost it all, and then they didn't have God to fall back on, so they didn't have anything to live for. They felt like their life was over, and they did commit suicide. One guy, I know they found him, he had shot himself, and he had the newspaper open to the stock market page laying over his body. And there was his suicide note. Another guy, he committed suicide. I can't remember how he did, but he was down to his last 4 pennies. That's all the money he had left in the world. So he didn't feel like he could make it. So he wrote a suicide note. And in that note, he said, I leave my body to science, my soul to the Secretary of the Treasury, and my sympathy to my creditors. Okay, so if I owed you money, I'm sorry, but I'm not going to face you. I'm going out. Okay, so that's kind of how the mindset of a lot of people was at that time, and I feel like maybe that's still true to some point today. There's some people where if they lost everything, they had their possessions, their houses, their cars, all that, they just, I'm done. I don't have anybody else to trust in. But God tells us if we trust in Him, He'll take care of us. So our first verse we want to look at is in Matthew chapter 6, verses 33 and 34. Matthew 6, 33 and 34. He says, Be not therefore anxious, saying, What shall we eat, or what shall we drink, or wherewithal shall we be clothed? For after all these things do the Gentiles seek. For your heavenly Father knoweth that ye have need of all these things. But seek ye first His kingdom and His righteousness, and all these things shall be added unto you. That kind of sums it all up. All those things we worry about, and I'm guilty of this myself. I'm preaching to me, okay? I've been in tights before financially where I was worried about paying the bills, and maybe I had overextended and had too many things I really didn't need to be paying for. And maybe, job situation changed or whatever. So I've been there. I understand that. But we worry too much about what we can do instead of turning it over to God and what can He do. But if we put our faith in Him, He says He'll take care of us, okay? So Matthew 6:33 and 34 is a good one. Based on that faith, you may have heard this story before, but it's a good one, so I'll retell it. But there's a story of a man who was wandering in the desert and he got lost. And in that period of time, he had some water, but he had drank all of his water, and he had been 2 days without water. Well, you all know about 3 days is most you can make it without water. So he was close to death's door. And as he's stumbling through the desert, he sees this old shack. He's not sure if he really sees it or is this a mirage. But he goes ahead and he goes toward it. Once he gets there, it's real. And out front is this old dusty water pump, rusted up. So he said, man, thank you. So he goes over there and he starts just wearing the handle out. Nothing. No water comes out. So he's like, man, thought I had something, I don't. So he went ahead and went into the shack. When he goes in, he sees over in the corner, there's a dusty mason jar full of water. And around it, there's tied a note. He takes the note off, and the note says, don't drink the water, use it to prime the pump. So now he's got a decision to make. Do I have faith in the person who left this note? And even if they're not lying, how do I know it's going to work? That old pump was in bad shape. So he finally decides, well, I'm going to risk it. So sure enough, he pours the water in the pump, keeps to prime it. It starts working. He's got all the water he needs. He fills up his canteen. Well, the note also said, when you get what you need, fill the jug back up and put it back in the cabin for the next person. Okay? So he did that, and as he looked at the note on the back side, there was also a map that showed him how to get to the nearest place so he could get out of his situation. So by trusting, by having faith in what that little note said, he saved his life and the life of the next person that came along. And on the bottom of that note, he wrote, believe me, it works. So the next person would see that this has worked before. So that's kind of how we need to be. We need to be trusting in God that He'll take care of us. If we'll take what He's given us, instead of consuming it all, if we'll use it to produce something else, we'll have all we need. He'll provide for everything we need, and we can also pass it on to others so that they have what they need. So I always thought that was a great story, and it definitely related to our thing here. All right, but as far as what matters most to us, we said God is number one. So what's number two? Well, in Ephesians 6:24 and 25 says, but as the church is subject to Christ, so let the wives also be to their husbands in everything. Husband, loves your wife, even as Christ also loved the church and gave Himself for it. The next thing on our list, if we're married, is our spouse. All right? God is number one. Next to that has to be our spouse. Ephesians 6:33 on down in that same chapter says, love each one his own wife, even as himself. So we're to love our spouse as much as we love ourselves. And we also know that, we're once we're married, we become one flesh. So they are ourselves as far as that goes. Do we always do that? Probably not. We're human. We make mistakes. Okay, there's times we don't do that. But overall, if you want to be happy, guys, be sure you do that. All right? And true for women too. All right? But how do we demonstrate to our spouse that they're our priority? And I'm talking to men and women here. Well, it's two big ways. I think there's a lot of different ways you can do. But one, include them always in your plans. When you're making decisions and plans, be sure that your spouse is involved in that. How is this going to affect them? Me and my wife have made several moves down through the years in my job, and we never made it without both sitting down and deciding that was good for us as a family to do that. There's been times we could have moved, we didn't move, but sometimes there's times that we have, and we always made those decisions together. And good Lord's been good to us, and all those have worked out. That's why I'm here. Okay, I made that last decision to come here 2 years ago, so that's worked out well. And every time before we moved, not patting ourselves on the back, but we always want to know what was the church like in that area. We made one move to Talladega County and several years ago, and the church was not that strong in that part of the county there. There was really one congregation in that whole town and not too many anywhere close. But that was a really strong group, and we really grew the short time we was there, and it was a good place for us. But, that include your spouse in your plans. Another thing is pay attention to their needs and put them above your own. And for guys, this is something we have to learn, and women too, but especially us guys, those are different. When we were living in Gardendale, and we went to Decatur Highway Church of Christ there, and had two different preachers while we were there. The first one was Mike Winkler. The second one was Miles Stutz. I'm sure you know Miles. But when Mike Winkler was there, he taught a Wednesday night class for the young married couples, and we were young married at that time. But it was called His Needs, Her Needs, in a Wednesday night class. And that book was awesome, okay? We still have our copy. We still read it from time to time. I've given it to countless other couples down through the years. But in it, we studied about how you meet those needs of your spouse, and how what the man needs is different than what the woman needs. What she needs is different than him. So by understanding those things and meeting those needs and being there for each other, you can have a lot happier life. And it made our marriage a lot better. Because I'm making an excuse, I guess, but I grew up in a family of boys and all men. I had one female cousin, first cousin, so it was all guys. And I really didn't know how women worked. I don't know if any of us know how women work. I'm not saying I still do, okay, but I sure didn't at that point. So I had a lot to learn. And also, we got married when we was a little later. I was 26 and she was 24, and I was kind of set my ways and used to doing my own thing. If I wanted to go somewhere, I went. I didn't have to think about what anybody else wanted to do. So I had to make a lot of adjustments. So, those things are things that we need to take into account. So if we do those two things, make sure our spouse is right behind God, then we're going to do well. Number 3 is our children. Research shows, though, that putting your spouse first provides that security, comfort, and stability that your children really thrive on. If they see that mom and dad love each other and they're happy together, kids are a lot happier, okay? Too many times, and sometimes it can't be helped. I'm not placing blame, but, we have broken families where kids don't have that stability. There's unrest at home, and, kids take advantage of that sometimes. They'll play mom against dad and try to get what they want. We see that all the time. But if there is that stability, and if mom and dad are together and love each other, put each other, take care of each other, that's much better for the children. Parenthood is both a blessing and a responsibility. We read that in the Bible over and over. Psalms 127:5 is talking about that, says children are like a arrow to a warrior, and happy is the man who has a quiver full of them. And we read multiple verses about the joy of motherhood and that strong bond. I don't know that there's a stronger bond when that woman has carried that child for 9 months that us men can really understand. We love our kids, but I don't know if we understand that mother-child thing other than us being our own mom, how that was, But, parenthood is an important responsibility, and right behind our spouse is our children. Sometimes our marriages have problems when we put our children above our spouse. And I'm talking more to women, I guess I am men now, because sometimes women do that, I think, As men, that's one thing you hear a lot. I was king until we had a baby, and now I'm second fiddle, What does the baby need? Well, I used to fix your plate. Now I'm feeding the baby. You get your own, okay? So, those things kind of change once you start having kids. So, that's part of it. But number 1, God. Number 2, spouse. Number 3, our children. Next is our extended family. All right, that being our once we marry, Ephesians 5:31, for this reason a man shall leave his father and mother and be joined to his wife, and those two shall become one flesh. So you leave. Now that spouse has to take priority over your family. That doesn't mean you still don't love your parents. It don't mean that you don't love your in-laws, but somebody has moved into that place now, and you have to make some adjustments. Sometimes that's a little hard. Sometimes in-laws don't do a good job of that. They still want to hold on to that baby, and they can't think of them being with somebody else now and that being their priority. Just my kids are not married yet, but two of them do live away out of the house now, and they have their own lives, so they don't call every day, and we don't see them like we used to. That's luckily they stayed close. I know my middle one, when she first was getting out and about to get a job, she said, I think I'm going to Denver, Colorado. And I said, please don't go to Denver, Colorado. Can you not find a job closer to that? So she ended up in Huntsville, thank goodness. Well, the baby, she said, I think I'm going to South Korea. I said, South Korea? Are you out of your mind? So luckily she's still around close too. But I was like, man, I know I'm going to lose you, but that's a long way away. But we still have that affection, but there has to be priority now. A lot of jokes about in-laws and all that. I'm extremely lucky. I have awesome in-laws. We've been married a couple of years. The first house we ever bought, we lived in a couple of houses, but the first house we bought was the house my wife grew up in. And we were at my in-laws eating one day, and we were talking about, well, we're starting to look for a house, and he kind of surprised me, and he said, what about this one? I said, what? He said, I've been wanting to build a new house anyway. I'll sell you this house. So they sold us one of those deals, family suite deals you couldn't turn down. So we bought their house, and they built a new house just a little ways up the road. And sometimes that's not good, but it was fine. My in-laws, when we lived within, you couldn't throw a rock. It was pretty close. But they never came to the house, just showed up. They called before they come and see us. They respected that we had to be on our own, even though we were close, and that we had to make a go of it on our own. So that works both ways, you with your family and then with you both back and forth. So we still have a responsibility to our in-laws. A great example of that in the Bible is Ruth. We read in the Old Testament. Things were different in those days, but Ruth, when her husband died and then her father-in-law died, it was just her and her mother-in-law. And mother-in-law says, you need to go find another man. You remarry, you're young, remarry, go on with your life. And she said, nope, wherever you go, I go. And they took care of each other. So that's a good example of how, as family, we can take care of our extended family. So God, spouse, children, extended family. Next, our brothers and sisters in Christ. Okay. Therefore, in Galatians 6 and verse 10, therefore, as we have opportunity, let us do good to all men, especially those who are the household of faith. So we have an obligation to our church family too. That's obvious. We help each other out, and I can't imagine not having that. Said we've moved around some, but every place we've been, we found a loving church family that we could count on. Even when we were far away from home, we didn't have family close. We never lacked for somebody that we could turn to, that you knew if you needed something, all you had to do was pick up the phone and call. And, it's been that way here. Y'all made us feel very welcome, very short time. And people check on us and bring stuff by, those kind of things. I know when we had the second little COVID, I called it here a while back, somebody brought by food one day, and we were fine. We weren't like we were sick that first time we had it, but still, somebody cared enough to check on you and bring you something by. It's good to know people care about you and they're willing to take care of you. So, brothers and sisters in Christ, that's the next family. And that's the family that hopefully we're going to spend eternity with. So we should be close to those folks. We're all here trying to do the same thing. That's to help each other get to heaven. And then last but not least, number 6 is the rest of the world. 1 John 3:17-18 says, but whoever has this world's goods and sees his brother in need and shuts up his heart from him, how does the love of God abide in him? So we're told over and over, and that's just one verse, there's too many to list, but how we should treat our fellow man, our neighbor. The story of the Good Samaritan. Who is my neighbor? Well, it's not just a person who lives next door. It's everybody. We're all neighbors in this world. And there in that story, the last person who would have picked that would help them, that Samaritan, helped a Jew who didn't like them, despised them, looked down on them, but they were still their neighbor and they still cared for each other. So we're very much supposed to take care of our own. That has changed down through the years and really recent. We kind of count on the government for too many things, and that being one of them, is to take care of people who can't take care of themselves. And, Social Security, we hear about that a lot. I'm 59, and I'll hopefully be in that category before too much longer. But, Social Security is not what it used to be. It was originally developed in 1935 by President Roosevelt, kind of in the throes of the Depression, but to help out people who couldn't help themselves. And it was there for the elderly who didn't have somebody to help them, take care of them. It was for unemployed, disabled. So it was people to try to help you get back on your feet, or somebody who was in a situation they couldn't do anything else. And I think at that time we kind of got away from what had always been done before, which was taking care of each other. We didn't wait on the government to do those things. You took care of your family. You took care of your neighbors. If somebody needed something, they did it. I'm not old enough to do this, but barn raisins. If somebody needed a new barn built, then everybody in the neighborhood got together and they helped them build it. If somebody's house burned, they helped them build another one. If their crops were failing, they helped them. If they had a hog to kill, then they all came together and helped them do that. Everybody took care of each other. We didn't wait on the government to send us a check. And that has, I don't want to get into politics tonight, but that has changed, where people depend on that as a way of making a living, not as a fallback. And we should be helping those people ourselves, because what does that do? When we do that, it shows we love them. It also gives us opportunity to teach them about Christ. Because if you help somebody first, you can preach at them, or you can show them a lesson. We had a thing in chapel today. Matt Hupel is at Mars Hill is our campus ministry, and he did a talk today. It was awesome. He did a object lesson, I guess you'd say, but he took one of the boys, one of his youth group from where he preaches at, and blindfolded him, and he says, all right, spin you around and around. He says, all right, everybody in the audience, y'all tell him where to go. He's got to get up on the stage. So they were all, go right, go left, stop, whoa, whoa, whoa. And then he got up there, and then they brought him back down. And he said, that's how it is with us. He said, we can do that way, and everybody's hollering, telling you a different direction. People trying to figure out how to get to heaven, and we're preaching at him or hollering at him, or don't do this or do that. He said, this is how you do it. And then he went and he took him by the arm, and he walked him and helped him side by side to get where he needed to be. He said, that's how we do. We show people, we help people. That gives us a chance to teach them, and they see it in us. So that's how we should be doing when we help each other out. We're not just helping them physically. Christ did that all the time. He fed people. He healed the sick. Those people got hungry again. Those people died later if they were sick, or even the ones he raised from the dead. The point was to show his power, and then also to provide an opportunity to teach a lesson. So by not taking care of the rest of the world, we're doing a disservice to God. Because he says, if you give a cup of water to one of these who needs it, you've done it for me. So our order again of what our priority should be God, should be our spouse, should be our children, our family, brothers and sisters in Christ, and then the rest of the world. So he spells that out pretty clear for us about how we should manage that. All right, point number 2. We spent a lot of time on that one, but I think that was an important one. Number 2 was determined not to get distracted. It was easy to get bogged down with all the daily cares. We talked about that in this first point. Too many times we spend time on what's urgent and not what's important. You ever caught yourself doing that? I'm dealing with things that are emergency. I'm putting out fires, and I'm not spending time doing what I need to do. As a school administrator, there was days I did that. I had certain things I needed to do, which was be out in the classroom. I need to be talking to the kids. I need to be working in the class, seeing what teaching's going on. But I was bogged down in my office, take care of managerial stuff, administrative stuff, and I wasn't able to do what I really should be doing. I was bogged down, and that's how we get in life a lot of times, just like you do at work sometimes. Again, we said that can't see the forest for the trees. And you may have heard this principle. It's on your outline there, the 80-20 principle. 80-20 principle says that 80% of the results comes from 20% of the activity. So of all the things we really accomplish, probably only about 20% of the time that we get to spend is where we're doing that. So if we can get our priorities straight, don't get distracted by all this side stuff going on, by all the noise and clutter, then we can get more done. A great example of that is Luke chapter 10 and verse 40. There Jesus has came to the house of some of his close friends, Mary, Martha, and Lazarus, and they provided a meal, and they're socializing and all this kind of stuff. If you remember that story, Martha is a lot like my grandmother Goodwin used to be. If you came to her house, she would worry you to death. loved her. She loved her family. But, hey, can I get you something? Can I get you another piece of cake? She was up doing something all the time, trying to make sure everybody was taken care of, that the floor was swept, that the dishes was washed, that the meal was cooked, that you had seconds, that your glass was full, all those things. Well, that was what Martha was doing. And then Martha got frustrated because Mary wasn't helping her, if you remember the story. So it says, Martha was cumbered about much serving, and she came up to him and said, Lord, does thou not care that my sister should leave me to serve alone? Bid her to help me. So she's wanting Jesus to get on to her. She says, look, I'm doing all this work. She's sitting over there listening to you talk. I need her help. Will you tell her to come help me? So what was his reply? It says, but the Lord answered and said to her, Martha, Martha, thou art anxious and troubled about many things, but one thing is needful. For Mary has chosen the good part, that which shall not be taken away from her. So instead of chastising her, he really got on to Martha. He said, Martha, Martha, come on. You're worried about all these things that really don't matter. He said, Mary has picked what's most important, which is spiritual things. So too many times we get distracted. We get caught up in those daily things. And sometimes the things that we're doing are good. There was nothing wrong with the stuff she was doing. Even church work. We can be very busy doing stuff here for the local congregation. And we can get overextended. And all of us have probably done that at one point. Sometimes you have to learn to say no. Even when it's something good, if you've already got your plate full. I've been in that situation before, where people would ask me to do this, and I'd say okay, and somebody else asked me to do that, I'd say yes. And I did that one time, and I got more than I could do, and I said, I've got to learn to figure out what can I do and do a good job instead of halfway doing 10 different jobs and try to spend my time where I should be to get the most done. So even in good things, figure out and make priorities. Also, Satan's always going to try to distract us if he sees we're doing something good. He's going to throw up other things, okay? There's something I should be doing, but something comes up, and I'd really like to be doing that. Somebody said, hey, you want to go fishing? It's one trip, and you're going to get to go again. Okay. A friend of mine, there was a Chris Stapleton. I don't know if you follow country music, but before he got really popular just a few years ago, me and a guy I used to work with, we both kind of discovered him before he got discovered. We liked his music. Well, he was going to be playing at this little place in Birmingham. The tickets were like $20. I mean, it was nothing. And after he won the Grammy or whatever it was, whatever the Country Music Award, then the tickets were like $300. So we were going to go. Well, we had a meeting at church, and they changed the dates for VBS. So I was heavily involved in helping with VBS, so I had to make a decision. Am I going to the concert, or am I going to help with VBS? So, I could have weaseled out of it and said, well, I'm just going to miss one night, but you got to get your priorities straight. So I missed the concert, which it all ended out for the good. He's still popular, and I still got a chance to go someday if I want to. So, he's got even better music than he did back then when I first wanted to hear him. So it's been all right. In Nehemiah 6, verses 2 and 3, Nehemiah has come back, and he is one of them that's rebuilding the walls after they've been, all the children of Israel have been taken away. He comes back, and they're sent back, and they're going to rebuild the walls of Jerusalem. Well, the people around him, their enemies, see that that's happening, it's going good, and they're trying to hinder him. So this group of people, and I won't get into the deep details, but they send a message to him. They say, Nehemiah, come let us meet together in one of the villages in the plain of Ono. He says, but they sought to do me mischief. He said, I sent messengers unto them, saying, I am doing a great work, so that I cannot come down. So why should the work cease while I leave it and come down to you? So he didn't get distracted. He could have went down and talked to these people, but he saw through their plan. They're just trying to distract me from getting this work done. He said, I got a good thing going. I got some important work I need to be doing. I can't stop and come talk to you and stop the work that's going on. I don't need to get distracted. So, keep ourselves on the right path. All right, point number 3 is dedicate yourself to living a life of priority. Once you set your priorities, once you determine not to get distracted, now you got to dedicate yourself, make it a habit. That's what we're talking about, is habits. Making a habit to do those things day in and day out. Important little saying I heard a long time ago. It says, if it's important to you, you'll find a way. If it isn't, you'll find an excuse. Okay? Guy I used to coach with when I was in Gardendale. He was our offensive line coach, but he was also a wrestling coach, and he'd won several state championships as a wrestling coach. But he didn't have a whole bunch of rules. He didn't have them. Well, if you miss so many practices for this or for that or for doctor's note or whatever you run. He said, I just sell them. If it's important to you, you'll be there. If it's not, you'll find an excuse not to be there. And if you don't, you're not going to improve, and I'll have somebody else that'll take your place. So he made it real simple. So that's how God is for us. If it's important, you'll find a way to get it done. If it's not, you'll find an excuse. So in Luke chapter 14, verses 16 through 24, we saw this mentioned or heard it talked about many times, but we'll just cut out some of the parts here. But it says, but a certain man made a great supper, and he bade many or invited many. And then down in verse 18 it says, they all with one consent began to make excuse. One said, I have bought a field and must go see it. Another one said, I bought 5 yoke of oxen. I need to go prove them. Another said, I've married a wife, therefore I cannot come. So all of them had some excuse if they couldn't come. Okay, this is a parable. So the point was here, many of us have been invited, but we all can find an excuse not to come and do what we need to do. So he told his servant, for I say unto you that none of those men that were bidden shall taste my supper. So for us, if we make excuse and we don't do, we're not going to get the reward. We're not going to get the supper. We're not going to get it. We got invited. If we don't make the effort to show up, do what we're supposed to do, we won't have that opportunity, So make it a priority, and then make it a point that you're going to do that. Don't make excuses. Get it done. A lot of times in the Bible, it compares living the Christian life to a soldier in battle. Godly soldiers are described as loyal, faithful servants, willing to sacrifice everything, including their own lives, in order to serve their king. The life of soldiers is hard, and they have to endure a lot of hardships. So in order to keep on that task and dedicate yourself to that, you have to stay there. Some of y'all have been in the military. But once you make that commitment, you're there, okay? You belong to them, and you're there 24/7. There's no off time. There's no vacation days. You're there. If we're talking about wartime, and sometimes even in peacetime. But 2 Timothy chapter 2, verses 3 and 4 says, you therefore must endure hardship as a good soldier of Jesus Christ. No one engaged in warfare entangles himself with the affairs of this life, that he may please him who enlisted him as a soldier. So when you take that oath that I join up and I'm going to wear the uniform, you made that commitment that I'm going to be there. Okay, I've never been in the military, never been in war, obviously, but we read a lot of. One way we learn about what it's like is by reading letters home from soldiers. And I kind of was looking at some of those and reading some accounts from the Revolutionary War, Civil War, World War I, Vietnam, all the different wars that have been fought just for our country, and some of the letters and things that they wrote home about. But probably the Civil War may have been one of the worst. I know we had more loss of life, of American life, because both sides were Americans fighting each other. But at that time, there was the technology for battle and weapons had increased, but medical care had not. So you had a lot more chance of getting injured seriously, and medicine was not. If you got shot, the mini ball that they had at that time was a new type of bullet, and it was soft lead with a hollow. When it hit, it didn't go straight through. It splattered, and if it hit you in the arm, it's going to break the bone and just mess up everything. So most times, if you got hit, they cut that off. That's about all they could do, and they didn't know much about cleanliness. They just put you up there, use the same knife on the next guy. Not much for anesthesia. Somebody hold him down while we saw this bone in two. It was bad. And then on top of that, even when you weren't in battle, they talked about the boredom of being in camp and then the sickness. More soldiers died from sickness than they did from the enemy. And that's been true of a lot of different wars. But, just the constant drill, the physical labor of digging trenches and building ramparts and moving equipment. I mean, it was very, very rough on you. And then just the horrors of war. But you committed yourself to that. And you couldn't be thinking about other things you had at home. You left that to the people at home, especially wars we fought overseas where you left. I know my granddad I talk about a lot. He was in World War II in the Pacific. He left, was gone way across the ocean for a long time before he came back when the war was over with. I remember my mother says she remembers, she was too little to remember him. She'd just been born when he left, and she was up a little bigger when he came home, but she didn't recognize him. She said, I was scared of him. Who is that man? So he had missed all that time of his child growing up to the point that she didn't even know who he was. So you give away a lot to your master when you make that commitment. So that's how we are. That's how we should be. Another example is we should live our life kind of like an Olympic athlete. You know, athletes, they seek in that prize. And that discipline you have to be an athlete at that level is unreal. You know, it's a 24/7 job. Athletes like to sleep in, but he knows he's got to get up early and train. He like to eat unhealthy food, eat some pizza, drink some Coke. Can't do that, okay? Because he has to maintain a proper diet so he can fuel his body, so that he can recover and he can stand up to train. He does. He like to stay up late and socialize with his friends, but he got to go to bed. He's got to get the rest so he can recover and recuperate to be the best he can do. So in order for an athlete to do all those things, he has to continue to work. He has to discipline himself so he's able to accomplish those things. So us as Christians, in order to set those priorities and get there, we have to discipline ourselves. Discipline is I got this sign in my classroom. Discipline is denying yourself what you want for now for what you want most. So right now, I'd really like to eat that piece of pizza, okay? But I can't reach my goal if I do that, okay? So that goal is we have to meet is we have to deny ourselves of certain things, discipline ourselves to accomplish the things that we want to accomplish. Living the Christian life is on that same. It's a marathon. It's not a sprint. You know, I've coached track for a lot of years. When you ask who else, when they're first young, when they come out for track the first year, who's a sprinter? Everybody's a sprinter because those races don't last long. Who's a distance runner? Not me. I don't want to run a mile. I sure don't want to run 2 miles. I don't want to be in that race. Okay, you know. So, but this Christian life is a marathon. It's putting one foot in another and just keep going. And as a coach, those distance runners were usually my favorite kids because they were disciplined. They were usually our smart kids. They understood about setting goals. They usually had high GPAs because they had that same discipline in the classroom that they did out there on the track. So those kids were some of my favorites. Corinthians 9:25, and everyone who competes for the prize is temperate in all things. Now they do it to obtain a perishable crown, but we for an imperishable crown. So we know that what we get is a lot more than what they got. In the original Olympics, all they got, now they get a gold medal. They used to just get this little laurel wreath thing that they made out of these branches. That's not going to last very long. So that was a short-term reward for all that work. But for us, if we maintain that marathon and we maintain that discipline it takes to live that Christian life, we're going to get a lot more than that. So hopefully, if we do that, we can be confident what our final reward is going to be. We'll wrap it up here before the next bell ring. But 2 Timothy 4:7-8 says, I have fought the good fight, I have finished the race, I have kept the faith. Finally, there is laid up for me the crown of righteousness, which the Lord, the righteous judge, shall give me on that day, and not to me only, but also to all who have loved his appearing. So that's our ultimate goal. That's what we want to be able to say at the end. And I wanted to make a few more comments about that, but maybe we'll do that in our next lesson. But just to wrap it up, in summary, we had 3 points. Decide what matters most, set your priorities. Number 2, determine not to get distracted, maintain your focus. And number 3, dedicate yourself to living a life of priority, or live it. One last statement, and this kind of puts it all in perspective. When we put God first, all other things fall into their proper place, or either they drop out of our lives. The love of the Lord will cover the claims of our affection, the demands of our time, the interests we pursue, and the order of our priorities. So I think that kind of says it all. If God happens first, all that other stuff works itself out. And if something doesn't fit in there, if it drops out, it wasn't supposed to be there anyway. So hopefully shared something with you tonight that make you think. And hopefully this series of lessons is doing you as much good as it is me. Bow with me and we'll wrap up with a prayer. Father, we thank you for today. Thank you for the opportunity we've had to come together and hear no lesson of thy word. Pray, Father, for the lessons you teach us, that we can apply those to ourselves. As we always say, we become better servants of thine. In this series, Father, pray that they would make us stronger Christians, so that we be stronger members of this congregation. We might strengthen the entire group. Father, be the ones who are sick, not able to be with us tonight. Pray that you care for them. The ones who are taking it for them, pray that they would regain the health. They'd be back there in one place in life. Father, be with the missionaries, be with Brother Mark Posey as he's in Ukraine, be with that part of the world as a lot of unrest there. We know we have many brothers and sisters who are in that part of the country or that part of the world. Pray that you bless them, keep them safe, free from harm, and they continue to do good in thy name. All these prayers we ask in Christ's name. Amen.